Elena Carter had always been practical. Love letters were a thing of fiction, something that happened in old romance novels and black-and-white films. Not in real life. Certainly not in her life. So when she found the envelope in her mailbox, nestled between bills and an online shopping package, she almost missed it. The paper was thick, the kind that felt expensive beneath her fingertips. The envelope had no return address, just her name in elegant handwriting. Elena Carter. Her eyebrows knitted together. No sender. No postage stamp. Someone had hand-delivered this. Curious, she stepped into her apartment, tossing her keys onto the counter before carefully tearing the envelope open. A single sheet of paper slipped out, neatly folded. The handwriting inside was just as graceful as the name on the envelope. Elena. I know this must be strange, but please, believe me when I say I have only your best interests at heart. I can't explain everything yet, but trust me when I say this. Do not take the shortcut through Fifth Avenue tonight. Be safe. Yours, L. Elena read the letter twice, her heartbeat quickening. Who was L? And how did he know where she planned to go? She glanced at the clock. It was 6:45 p.m. She had planned to meet her best friend, Claire, for dinner at a new restaurant downtown. Normally, she would take a cab, but traffic had been horrible all week. Just this morning, she had decided she'd cut through Fifth Avenue on foot. It would shave 10 minutes off her commute. A prickle ran down her spine. Nobody else knew her route. Not Claire, not her coworkers, not even her doorman. So how did L? Her rational mind told her it was a prank. Some elaborate joke. Maybe even a marketing gimmick for some mystery novel. But something inside her, some deep, instinctual part, hesitated. She wasn't superstitious. But she wasn't reckless either. With a sigh, she grabbed her coat and decided she'd take a cab after all. Elena had almost forgotten about the letter by the time she arrived home, stomach full from dinner, laughter from Claire still ringing in her ears. But as she flipped on the TV, her blood ran cold. Breaking news. Fatal mugging on Fifth Avenue. The reporter stood in front of yellow police tape. Behind her, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the scene. Authorities report that the attack happened around 7:30 p.m. The victim, a young woman, was found unconscious. Witnesses say she was walking alone when Elena didn't hear the rest. 7:30 p.m. That was exactly when she would have been there. Her hands trembled as she reached for the letter. Who are you, El? And how did you know? She wasn't sure if she was terrified or intrigued. But one thing was certain. She would read the next letter. The next morning, Elena woke up restless. The letter from last night lay on her bedside table, the inked words still as bold as when she first read them. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the news over and over. If she had taken the shortcut through Fifth Avenue, would she have been the one lying on the pavement, unconscious and bleeding? The logical side of her brain insisted it was just a coincidence. A strange, unsettling coincidence. But the deeper, instinctual part of her, the part that had kept her alive last night, wasn't convinced. And then, 2 days later, another letter arrived. Elena nearly dropped her coffee when she saw the familiar thick envelope sitting in her mailbox. She glanced around the hallway of her apartment complex, searching for any sign of the mysterious sender. But there was no one. No shadow lingering at the corner. No retreating figure. Heart pounding, she tore open the envelope the second she stepped inside her apartment. Elena, I hope you listened to my warning. I can't tell you everything yet, but I need you to trust me. If you value your life, don't go to the coffee shop on 12th Street tomorrow at 8 a.m. Stay safe.
L.
Her breath hitched. The coffee shop on 12th Street. Her coffee shop. It was her routine. Every morning before work, she stopped by Bella's cafe for her usual order. A caramel macchiato, no whipped cream. Elena swallowed hard. The first letter had saved her from being mugged. What if this one was another warning? She clenched the letter in her fist, feeling the weight of her next decision pressing down on her. Did she take the risk? Or did she listen to a man she had never met? Elena stood by her window, watching the city move below her. She had wanted to brush the warning aside, to continue her routine as if everything were normal. But she couldn't shake the feeling. The same instinct that had kept her away from Fifth Avenue was screaming at her to stay home.
So she did.
At exactly 8:05 a.m., her phone buzzed with a news alert. She froze. Breaking news: explosion at Bella's cafe, casualties reported. Her vision blurred as she read the headline. An explosion. Right at the coffee shop. Right at the exact time she would have been there. Her stomach churned. The letter had been right. Again. Shakily, she pulled it out from where she had placed it on her desk. Her fingers ran over the words.
The ink.
The paper. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was watching out for her. And he knew things he shouldn't. Elena wasn't just intrigued anymore. She was terrified. And she needed to find out who Elle really was. Elena barely made it through the day. She went to work as usual, sitting at her desk in the newsroom, but her thoughts were tangled in knots. The letters. The warnings. The fact that twice now someone had saved her life. And then there were the dreams. That night, she had another one. She was standing on a quiet beach, the waves lapping gently at her feet. A soft breeze swept through her hair, carrying the scent of salt and something familiar, something warm, like home. And then he was there. A man stood beside her, his presence as natural as if he had always belonged there. She turned to face him, but his features blurred, shifting like a reflection on water. Yet, despite that, her heart clenched with a deep, aching familiarity. They weren't strangers. She knew him. "You found my letters," he said softly, his voice rich and steady. Elena felt her lips part to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "I've been trying to reach you," he continued. "To keep you safe. To find a way back to you." "Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper. But before he could answer, the dream dissolved into darkness. Elena jolted awake, heart racing. For a long moment, she simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, her breathing uneven. The dream had felt so real. She had never met this man before. She was certain of that. And yet, the warmth in his voice, the way he spoke to her as if he had known her forever. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. It was time to get some real answers. She began her search the next morning. First, she went to her building's security office, asking if they had footage of anyone delivering mail to her apartment. The guard, a gruff man named Victor, gave her a suspicious look but agreed to check. An hour later, he came back with nothing. "No one delivered anything to your mailbox, Miss Carter," he said, frowning. "Not in the last week, at least." Elena's blood ran cold. The letters had just appeared. She spent the rest of the day retracing her steps, asking the post office, even scanning through her emails for any strange activity. But there was nothing. No explanation. No logical answer. And when she came home that night, there was another letter waiting for her. She ripped open the envelope, hands shaking. "Elena, I know you're looking for me, but I need you to stop. Please trust me. If you go to the library tomorrow, you'll regret it."
Elle.
Elena's stomach tightened. The library. She had already planned to go there for an interview with an author for a feature piece. But if she ignored the warning, what would happen? The first time, she had nearly been mugged. The second time, she had narrowly avoided an explosion. Was this another life-or-death situation? Or was Elle trying to keep her away from something? Elena had a choice. She could listen, or she could finally break the pattern and see what Elle was trying to hide. And for the first time, she considered ignoring the warning. Elena sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter. She had obeyed Elle's warnings twice before, and each time, she had avoided disaster. But now, something felt different. The message wasn't just about keeping her safe. It felt like Elle was hiding something from her. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to listen. She grabbed her coat. She was going to the library. Elena stepped into the grand hall of the city library, the scent of old books and paper filling the air. The place was quiet, as expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Her heart pounded as she scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No danger. No disaster waiting to happen. Maybe this time Elle was wrong. She moved toward the second floor, where her interview was scheduled. But as she climbed the stairs, she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag as she turned her head slightly, scanning the crowd. And that's when she saw him. A man stood near the rows of bookshelves, half hidden behind the fiction section. He wasn't reading. He wasn't even pretending to browse. He was watching her. Elena's pulse jumped. Dark hair, sharp features, intense eyes that locked onto hers the second she turned. A strange familiarity swept over her, making her breath hitch. Was it him?
Elle?
Her decision was instant. She moved toward him. The man's eyes widened in surprise, and for a second, she saw something flicker across his face. Shock, recognition, longing. He turned and walked away.
No.
Elena quickened her pace, weaving through the shelves. Wait, she called, but the man didn't stop. She broke into a run, following him past the reading area, past the study cubicles. And then suddenly he was gone. Vanished. She spun around, searching desperately. There was no exit nearby. No way he could have disappeared so fast. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Whoever he was, he wasn't normal. That night, another letter arrived. Elena's hands shook as she opened it. Elena, you broke the pattern. You weren't supposed to see me yet. Please, for your own safety, stop looking for me. This isn't just about you anymore.
Elle.
Elena's breath caught. This wasn't just about keeping her safe anymore? Then what was it about? And why did she get the feeling that, for the first time, Elle was afraid? She wasn't backing down now. She was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Elena couldn't sleep. The letters, the warnings, the man at the library. All of it circled her mind like a storm, refusing to settle. But one thing was clear. She couldn't keep waiting for answers to come to her. She had to find them herself. The next morning, Elena made a decision. If Elle wouldn't come to her, she would force him out of hiding. She wrote a letter of her own.
Elle.
You say you're trying to protect me, but you won't tell me why. You warn me about things before they happen, but you won't explain how. I've listened to you twice, and I know you've saved my life. But I won't be kept in the dark anymore. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. If you really care about me, meet me at the bridge by midnight. No more secrets. Elena. She sealed the letter in an envelope, just as Elle had done, and placed it in her own mailbox. If he was watching her, he would find it. The bridge was empty when Elena arrived. A cold wind swept over the water, carrying the distant hum of the city. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and checked her watch. 11:59 p.m. Her heart pounded. Would he come? Or had she just called out to a ghost? Then, from the shadows, she felt it. A presence. She turned sharply, and there he was. The same man from the library. Only this time he didn't run. Elena's breath caught as he stepped forward. His face was sharp, almost familiar, his dark eyes watching her with something between hesitation and longing. You shouldn't have done this, he said, voice low. Elena clenched her fists. And you shouldn't have kept me in the dark. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he exhaled. You don't understand, Elena. I'm not supposed to be here. She frowned. What do you mean? A muscle in his jaw tensed. He hesitated, then said, I don't belong in this timeline. Elena's world tilted. Timeline? She shook her head. What are you talking about? The man ran a hand through his hair, looking at her with something raw in his eyes. In another world, another timeline, we were together. You knew me. You loved me. His voice turned soft. And I loved you. Elena's breath caught. But something went wrong, he continued. Something pulled us apart. And now I'm here, trying to fix it. Trying to keep you safe, so we can have another chance. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This was impossible. Unreal. And yet, something inside her whispered that it was the truth. Why me? She whispered. His expression darkened. Because in this timeline, Elena. He swallowed hard, eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. You're going to die. Elena felt the world closing in around her. "You're going to die." The words echoed in her mind, wrapping around her like a cold chain, but she forced herself to focus. "How?" she whispered. "When?" The man, L, hesitated. His hands curled into fists, as if holding back something painful. "It happens tomorrow," he finally said. "On the plane." Elena's stomach dropped. The flight. She had booked a trip to visit her sister in another state. She had barely thought about it until now. "You said I had a choice," she said, gripping the railing of the bridge. "If I don't get on the plane, will I be safe?" L exhaled, his expression tightening.
Yes.
"If you don't board that flight, you'll live." A rush of relief flooded her, until she saw the look in his eyes. There was more. "But," she pressed. "But something else will change," L admitted. "The timeline is fragile. By saving you, I could be shifting things in ways I can't predict." Elena let that sink in. She should have been afraid. She should have run the other way. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and asked the one question that had been burning in her mind since this all began. "Who are you, really?" L hesitated, his gaze locked onto hers. Then, after a long moment, he answered. "My name is Lucas," he said. "And in another life, I was yours." Lucas led her away from the bridge and into the quiet streets. He told her everything. How they had met in another timeline, one where they had fallen in love. How something had happened, a tragedy that neither of them had seen coming. How he had lost her, and how he had spent every moment since then trying to find a way to save her. As he spoke, something deep inside Elena stirred. It didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been possible. And yet, flashes of something, of someone, whispered at the edges of her mind. A hand reaching for hers. A soft laugh in the dark. A voice calling her name like she was the most important thing in the world. Memories she shouldn't have. Memories of him. She took a shaky breath, clutching her coat. "Why don't I remember?" Lucas's expression darkened. "Because this version of you never lived that life." He hesitated. "But I think you're starting to." Her pulse pounded. If that was true, then everything was about to change. And she wasn't sure if she was ready. The next morning, Elena sat at the airport, staring at the departure board. Her flight was boarding in 15 minutes. Lucas's warning replayed in her mind. "If you want to meet me, don't get on the plane." She gripped the edges of her ticket, her heartbeat hammering. If she boarded, she could be walking toward her death. If she didn't, she could be rewriting destiny itself. She looked up, and in the distance, standing by the windows overlooking the runway, was him. Lucas. Waiting. Elena took a breath. And then she stood up, making her choice. Elena stood at the gate, gripping her boarding pass, so tightly it crumpled in her hands. This was it. The moment everything would change. Her body screamed at her to move, to follow the path she had always taken, to step onto that plane like she was supposed to. But her heart was telling her something else. "If you want to meet me, don't get on the plane." She turned. Lucas was watching her from across the terminal, his expression unreadable. Waiting. Her breath caught. And then she let go. The boarding pass slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the ground like a fallen leaf. Elena took a step back. Then another. Then she turned and ran. The airport felt suffocating as Elena and Lucas stepped outside into the cool morning air. "You did it," Lucas breathed. His dark eyes searched hers, relief washing over his face. "You changed your fate." Elena swallowed hard, still shaken. "That's it." Lucas hesitated. "Not exactly." A chill ran through her. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Elena whipped around, her heart slamming against her ribs as she saw the news flashing across a nearby airport screen. Breaking news: Flight 217 crashes shortly after takeoff. No survivors. The world tilted. A sickening weight settled in her stomach. That should have been her. She should have been on that plane.
Dead.
She turned to Lucas, her voice barely a whisper. "I was really going to die." His gaze softened, but there was something else in his eyes. Something she didn't understand yet. You were never meant to survive that flight, he said. Until now. The sun was rising as they walked through the quiet streets. Elena had so many questions, but one burned brighter than the rest. What happens now? She asked. I survived. So, is this over? Lucas didn't answer right away. His hands were buried in his pockets, his expression troubled. You changed your fate, he said slowly. But fate doesn't like being rewritten. There will be consequences. Elena frowned. Like what? Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. I don't know, he admitted. But we'll find out. Elena swallowed. She had thought avoiding the plane would be the end of it. But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what came next. Elena had escaped death. But something was wrong. She felt it the moment she left the airport. A strange heaviness settled in her chest, like an invisible thread pulling at her, tying her to something unseen. It started with small things. A flickering streetlight that went out the moment she passed beneath it. A reflection in the glass of a store window that lingered a second too long after she had moved. A shadow in the corner of her vision that vanished when she turned. At first, she thought it was just her nerves. The weight of what had happened, the crash, the fact that she should have been dead. But then it got worse. The first real sign came the next morning. Elena woke up gasping for air, her chest tight, her heart racing. She had been dreaming, no, reliving something. The crash. She saw the fire, felt the heat, heard the screams of passengers who had been on that plane. And then she had seen herself. Not alive, not standing, but strapped into her seat, unmoving, lifeless, like she was meant to be. Elena shot out of bed, hands shaking. It was just a dream, wasn't it? She stumbled to the mirror, splashing cold water on her face. But as she looked up, her breath caught. Her reflection, it didn't move. She lifted a hand. Her reflection stayed frozen. Then slowly it smiled. Elena screamed and staggered back. When she looked again, the reflection was normal. But the terror in her chest didn't fade. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. She found Lucas at the small cafe where they had agreed to meet. His face darkened the moment he saw her. You saw something, didn't you? Elena swallowed, still shaken. I think fate is trying to pull me back. Lucas didn't look surprised. Instead, he exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. I was afraid of this. Elena clenched her fists. You knew. Lucas hesitated, then nodded. Changing fate isn't simple, Elena. The timeline is trying to correct itself. It doesn't want you to be alive. A shiver ran down her spine. So, what happens now? Lucas looked at her, his expression grim. Now, he said. Now we fight to keep you here. Elena had always believed that once she made a choice, that was it. The end of the story, a new path ahead. She had been wrong. Surviving the plane crash wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And now, fate was coming for her. Lucas took her to a secluded place, a small apartment he had been using since he arrived in her timeline. Time is fragile, he explained as he paced the room. By saving you, I disrupted the balance. Elena crossed her arms, still shaken from what she had seen in the mirror. So, what? The universe is mad at me? Lucas sighed. It's not anger, Elena. It's correction. You were supposed to die. And now, the timeline is trying to pull you back. A chill ran through her. What does that mean? Lucas looked at her, his expression dark. It means fate will keep sending signs. The world will start unraveling around you. And, if you're not careful, it will take you. Elena swallowed hard. Then how do I stop it? Lucas hesitated. There are two ways. Elena straightened. Tell me. The first way. He rubbed the back of his neck. You let fate take its course. A cold weight settled in her stomach. Meaning I die. Lucas flinched but nodded. Not happening, she snapped. What's the second way? Lucas hesitated longer this time. We strengthen your connection to this timeline. Elena frowned. How? Lucas took a deep breath. You need to remember. Elena blinked. Remember what? Lucas met her gaze, his eyes filled with something unreadable. Me, he said softly.
Us.
The life we had before. If you can anchor yourself to those memories, you might be able to rewrite your fate completely. Elena sat on the couch, hands trembling as Lucas placed his fingers against her temples. This might feel strange, he warned. She nodded, bracing herself. A moment later, warmth spread through her skull, like a golden thread unraveling in her mind. Then, a rush of images flooded her. A coffee shop, laughter, the feeling of his arms around her. A rainy night, running through empty streets, hands intertwined. A promise whispered in the dark, "I'll find you, no matter what." Tears burned in her eyes as the memory surfaced. It wasn't just flashes. It wasn't just images. It was real. Lucas had been hers. And she had been his. She gasped, clutching his wrist. "I remember." Lucas smiled softly, brushing away a tear. "Then we have a chance." Elena's mind spun as memories flooded her, of a life she had never lived in this timeline but had felt deep within her soul. She had loved Lucas. And she had lost him. Now, fate wanted to take her away again. But this time, she wouldn't let it. The signs grew stronger. Streetlights flickered and shattered as she walked by. Cars swerved out of nowhere, nearly hitting her. At night, shadows whispered her name, calling her to places where accidents had happened. But the worst came at midnight. Elena had been lying awake in Lucas's apartment when a strange feeling overcame her, like an unseen force tugging at her chest. She sat up and turned toward the mirror across the room. Her reflection wasn't there. Instead, she saw herself sitting on that plane, gripping the armrest. A voice whispered in her ear, "You are not meant to be here." Her body went cold. The vision shifted. The plane was burning. Smoke filled the cabin. And there, she sat, lifeless, exactly as she had seen in her nightmares. "Elena!" Lucas's voice snapped her back to reality. She gasped, clutching her chest as if she had just been pulled from drowning. Lucas grabbed her shoulders, his eyes filled with fear. "It's happening, isn't it?" She nodded, breathless. "Fate is trying to pull me back." Lucas clenched his jaw. "Then we don't have much time." Lucas led her outside, where the night air was sharp and crisp. "We have one last chance," he said. "If you can fully anchor yourself to this timeline, fate won't be able to take you back." Elena's hands curled into fists. "How do I do that?" Lucas hesitated before finally saying, "You have to make a choice so powerful, so permanent, that this timeline claims you." Elena swallowed hard. "Like what?" Lucas exhaled. "Love." Her breath hitched. "If we bind our souls here, if you choose to stay with me, fate won't be able to erase you." Her heart pounded. This was it. If she said yes, she would sever any connection to the timeline where she had died. She would belong here, with Lucas. But if she hesitated, if she faltered, fate would claim her. Lucas cupped her face, his touch warm and grounding. "I've lost you once before. I won't lose you again." Tears burned in her eyes. She had been given a second chance. Not just at life, but at love. And this time, she wouldn't let it slip away. Elena took a deep breath. Then she whispered, "I choose you." The moment the words left her lips, something shifted. A warmth spread through her body, golden and bright, as if an invisible thread had woven itself into her soul. The air around them shimmered. The streetlights flickered, then steadied. The eerie whispers faded into silence. And for the first time in days, the weight of impending doom lifted. Lucas exhaled shakily, pulling her into his arms. It worked. Elena held onto him tightly. She was here, really here, and fate would never take her again. 1 year later, Elena sat in a quiet cafe, watching the rain drizzle against the window. Lucas slid into the seat across from her, setting down 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Still thinking about it?" She smiled. "Sometimes." There were moments when she still felt it, the echoes of a life that had almost been lost. A flight she had never boarded. A grave that had never been filled. But more than anything, she felt alive. Lucas reached across the table, intertwining his fingers with hers. We won. Elena squeezed his hand. We did. No more warnings. No more shadows. Just the life they had fought for. And this time, they were meant to be.